everyone, and welcome to the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee. Today is September 19th. It is roughly 5:30 p.m. We go through a roll call. Just so for everyone here and everyone at home watching, we do have a hard stop at 6:45 today because we have planning board right after. So we will call the roll. Assistant Mayor Kelly, that's me. I'm here. Councilor
Here.
Fagan.
Here.
Megan.
Here.
Jen.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Councilor Moreau. Here. And then we also have Planning Board Chair Chelman.
Here.
And then we have the Deputy City Attorney, Trevor McCourt, Peter Smith from the Planning, and Howard, our Housing Navigator. Shouldn't have taken that cough syrup. Okay, so we will start with our Housing Navigator update.
You want me the remote, or you can open it up?
Oh,
Here we go.
hold on, let me share.
Everybody have a chance to read the packet and the grant that we're going to be talking about? I hope.
So my position is funded by a Housing Navigator grant from the state. There's a second grant that I've been managing, which is called the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant 1.0, which was funded through initiatives of the federal government. The state allocated it to a couple different municipalities in the state. What that HOP grant paid for was what we saw in terms of RKG coming through and during the analysis. It paid for a lot of the housing dialogue process that went on. The state has decided to give more money, so it's being called the HOP 2.0. And what you read is the program structure of the grant as well as the application process. So in wanting to build upon what we learned from the dialogue effort, as well as what RKG did for their preliminary zoning analysis, I'm encouraged to apply for this because as many people have said during the dialogue effort, enough of the studies, enough of the analysis, enough of the talking about it. What are we actually going to do? And so this grant provides the opportunity to get in to the zoning and other regulatory elements of the city and say, strike this, add this, change this in order to create more housing choices and opportunity. So we're working out what the scope is with RKG right now. And we're working with RKG for continuance because not only did they participate with the first grant, but they've been part of a housing market analysis that was done for PHA 3-4 years ago. So what I have provided in the packet was an outline of what would be considered for this committee to talk about, and not necessarily wordsmith everything, but understand what this letter would be coming from the Housing Committee that would be provided and required is not necessary, but it would add more to our grant application because this is something that's relatively new and being successful. So this letter of support, I wanted to highlight the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee, the goal statement that we came up with, and the importance of its activities and what it seeks to do in the future.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
When do you expect to hear on it?
What's that?
When do you think you'd hear back?
The grant applications due the 30th. The Board of Directors review all the applications through October, and then the awards go out in November.
Super.
So we're expecting this process, if we're awarded it, to start up really in the beginning of the year, given what goes on through late November and December. There's a very important element to what the grant outlines in terms of public engagement. So we want to make sure we capture that in a correct way. And we're lining out some of the efforts. And instead of it being a study circle or a dialogue effort, I'd like for that community engagement to be sitting down and having the community members, the people that are participating, really understanding what 4-acre per unit, what 8-acre per unit looks like, different modeling that's going to happen. Give us some visual selection, character and precedent images, so we can write that into the zoning code. So when people understand, if we're going to encourage higher density, it can be a softer density or it could be a higher density, but in certain areas. So the public engagement will probably be around January.
Councilor Tabor?
So it'd be good if we can get a motion from the committee just to recommend that we send this letter. And this is the,
Move to recommend the letter be signed and sent.
This letter will go to the,
It will be
with the
accepted.
application?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It's a letter of support.
And it's my understanding that what follows is part of the application as well.
yes.
Correct.
Yeah. So the letter, Eric, as I stated, isn't a requirement of the grant, but it's going to add a third element that they require a letter of support from city council, and they require one from the planning board.
How many other municipalities do you think will participate in this? In, from the original one, there was what, less than 10 municipalities that got the initial grant?
There was 10 or 12 housing navigator positions that were funded, and there's probably close to 20, 22 with the HOP grant, and those are distributed all across the state. So preference is being given to those that have already received the HOP grant, so we're already kind of out of the gate with the chances of being awarded this grant, but it's going to be open to a lot of municipalities of all different sizes.
Did we get a,
Technically, we had 2 HOP grants that we were originally awarded.
did we get a second?
We did. Jen? did you
Yes,
second?
I seconded.
Yeah.
I think it's important too, and I think it's important for this committee, with our goal and the whole intention of this committee. I know that there's a lot of municipalities in our state that do not have a housing committee, so I think the fact that we have one, we should definitely be submitting a letter of recommendation. Okay, so I'd call the vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Just hold your hands up. Oh, I guess is everyone? Okay.
Everyone.
Yeah. No opposed.
No opposed. Okay, perfect. And now we will go on to the chair, co-chair remarks for the upcoming schedule, so we can all know it and be pretty clear. There is one change. We have October 3rd, October 17th, October 31st. We'll be striking that one.
Thank you very much.
It's like a national holiday here in Portsmouth, if you don't know. And then November 14th.
Could you-
Yes.
I know it was in there, but I'm just.
It's okay. October 3rd.
Yep.
October 17th.
Yep.
And November 14th.
Mark your calendars. Get your costume.
And as always, just let us know as far in advance if you are not going to be here.
Sure.
Okay. And now on to our star of the show. As most of you have seen or hopefully you've seen in your packet, we are looking for the council has sent a request for the Housing Committee to review the GNOD, the Gateway Neighborhood Overlay District, which is something the zoning subcommittee was working on and then worked within staff. And then, one of our guests this evening is Planning Board Chair Rick Chelman, which I know that there have been requests for him to come back again. But we wanted to make sure he was here as he helped make sure this ordinance fit within our zoning currently. And then we have the Deputy City Attorney. How do we want to take this off?
Well, what I provided in the packet, just to get the committee familiarized, was the presentation I had done a while ago. We started this conversation so people can get a little bit refamiliarized with that. And then I provided in the packet something that I received from Trevor,
Yes.
which outlines the area and plan view for the overlay district, as well as the most current version of the ordinance.
This is go ahead, Jim.
Oh, well, I would like to state for the record, I was very excited about this. I think it's really innovative. It's really different from what has happened before. I just applaud everybody for working on it. I think it's really, really exciting. The payment in lieu option is exciting. I think the donation of land piece, well, I've got some comments about it. I think that's really cool. And I just, like, this was some real out-of-the-box thinking. I think it's really going to move the needle. So, great job.
And I think it has the ability to be replicated in different areas under different zoning. So, not necessarily the office research, but in some of our maybe small manufacturing and things like that. If we can use this, as I view this as a pilot for changing some of the overlays or developing overlays in other areas, I think it could be really great. But I would agree with you. We were really excited when we were tossing back ideas. And the land swap was something that we were really, I personally was really passionate about trying to get that in there, because if we can get buildable land, and as you go through, there are, metrics. So it's not like someone can just say like, oh, here's this piece of swampland for you guys. There's a lot of metrics, and a lot is put on a potential developer to do that, the good faith background. But yeah, do we want to jump into any highlights, or do we want to hear from the chairman? Any?
Is the focus of this discussion on Commerce Way?
Yes, so that's all.
Okay, it's not that, I saw the map and
Yeah.
and it seemed to be, bounded by the Commerce Way district right now.
Yeah, so it's the Gateway Neighborhood Overlay District, and right now that is office research. So it's essentially expanding the Gateway, kind of pick and play map drops.
Do you want to briefly describe how an overlay functions?
Yeah.
And
the base.
its relation to this committee is right now, any zoning changes that would allow housing would be at market rate, correct? With potential incentives that would, be built into the development.
Right. This gives us an opportunity to take a zoning district that has absolutely no housing allowed in it
Right.
and do an overlay. And this is sort of a pilot program to figure out if this is going to work or not. So it's an overlay that we lay over it that then allows you to bring in the housing and the density. And the workforce housing piece is brought in by those multiple ways. Like you can, take an incentive and give us workforce housing. You can give us money towards workforce housing. You can give us land towards workforce housing. So to break it down really simply, we're trying to give them more options of how the city can get more workforce housing.
And our assignment from the council is, we as the housing committee, is this good policy? Do we want to recommend back to the council that it's a green light, let's do it, let's go ahead with it? And Trevor, I think, put a sample motion into his memo.
And I think it's important to note that this is going on concurrently with the planning board tonight is going to look over this also.
Which is why we wanted the chairman here, so he can take all of our comments and bring them forward to the planning board. So planning board tonight will discuss it, and then we're requesting to hold a public hearing at its October meeting. So we're trying to do this all sort of at the same time.
I think it might be helpful for all of us to see the incentive table up on the screen.
That relates to this committee, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing,
That's the most direct relation.
well, I would say the whole thing relates to the committee because we're the housing committee. So what, one of the things that we discussed in the beginning, was 500 units, the majority of them ideally incentivizing affordable, but understanding that there's market value everywhere across from 20% AMI to over 100 and something AMI. So ideally, anything housing related or zoning related to housing will come before this committee or come from this committee. So just making sure that we are part of the process.
Mayor, if I may, I want to say too that this whole ordinance really is related to this committee because this is really where this committee is the genesis of this whole ordinance. I mean, you all had discussed expanding
Commerce Way.
Gateway into Commerce Way.
Kind of like our first, back when we were in the school board room.
And that was what prompted a conversation between, city staff and, property owners out there at Commerce Way, cane companies, representatives of the cane companies, about expanding some version of Gateway, which this is a version of Gateway, into this neighborhood. So to say that this ordinance relates to this committee. I mean, it really does.
It
comes
came
from this
out of the
committee.
working group.
See how farsighted you all were?
Nearsighted, actually, but.
Same with.
I did have a question. I mean, I too was very excited. Some of this stuff is definitely things I need to get more up to speed on. But one of my big concerns is that we come in this with all this goodwill, good intention, but are the developers actually going to take us up on these incentives? Are they enticing enough that they will agree to do them? Or will we create an overlay district and they'll just put in the 80 units and be done with it?
So I can speak to that because I was just going to bring up that point. When you look at the cost efficiency of building housing, 100 to 120 units in a building that's typically 5 stories is like your most cost effective. Yeah, it really is. Because when you think about how expensive an elevator is to put in, like putting in an elevator for 24 units, it just, the math doesn't math, right? But you put 2 elevators in for 120 units and suddenly you can amortize that cost over a greater extent. And you can build, this has up to 6 stories. I would argue that 5 stories is probably your most efficient because you can do that out of wood as opposed to steel, which is more expensive. So yes, from my eyes, these incentives, people would be interested in doing these things in order to get up to the 120.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Other questions that people have? Yeah.
Yeah, further clarity on the land swaps.
Yeah.
How would that work? Does it have to be? I mean, I know there was provisions in there that, like you said, Joe, they couldn't just like give you a parcel of swampland. But if we are running out of space, is that, I mean, not that we should eliminate that, but do we need to further define that? Is the land swap something that they're going to point to a parcel right away? They're not going to say down the road we'll find something?
I would look at.
Yeah, so how the whole thing is structured is you have to basically figure out, do your master planning for the entire development and identify whatever parcel or sections of land you want to convey to the city if you want to take advantage of that incentive. Because that's a city council process. And then the city council, coming out of that, once the city council accepts land, the developer gets what's called a prospective development incentive agreement, which they can then, it's like a ticket, you know what I mean? It's like a voucher. I provided my workforce housing to the city, and they can then bring that down to the planning board and say, I've provided my workforce, I've met my incentive bonus, now I can build this project, which allows for more incentives. And if I may, it also, the way that it's structured, you also have to, the developer also has to provide public realm improvements and community space, because one of the concerns that I've heard other people, you know, other staff members have brought up is integrating workforce housing within the market rate development, and by ensuring that the parcel of land is within the same overlay district and
Okay, that was
there are
another
community
question.
space and public realm, it'll make it feel more like it's integrated into the neighborhood.
And this is when it comes to public realm improvements, this is an and proposition, not an or proposition.
That's right.
Great. And just to clarify, the parcel of land would be in the overlay district.
Must
So
be.
in the same place, yeah, okay.
Correct.
Great.
And that was a big, I mean, it's a great point that you bring up, but that was a big part of our discussion. It's making sure they're not saying like, oh, well, this is prime real estate. We own something way in East Nowhere that there's no, desire to really develop. We'll give you that. We want to make sure that, what we want to make sure is that we're not building isolated communities more so than what we already see, right? That the workforce housing or below market rate housing, as I like to say, is integrated into the lifeblood of any new development that we can see as much as we can. I think it's a reminder that anything that we pass, there are people who build. I think the Christmas tree shop is a good example, that are building just to where their to right is. So they're not going after any variances, going after any CUPs.
But if this existed, they may have.
may have.
And I thought I read in there as well that should someone present a parcel of land that maybe is not in that parcel or in the overlay district, but that is appealing to the city council, that the city council would have the right to say, okay, well, we will accept that as an option, even though it's not. Am I just crazy and misread something?
What the city council has the option of doing is accepting, I mean, the requirement is that it's one parcel of land that meets the size requirements depending on how much land the developer is developing. The city council has the discretion to accept multiple parcels of land.
Okay.
Instead of just one. You could break it up into multiple parcels
That
of not
sums
less
to the
than one.
requirement.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That
Each
way-
parcel would have to be
that might
not,
have been what
not
you
less than
were
1
looking
acre, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that might have been what you saw.
So when I think about this and I think about what our committee is tasked with, right, which is making workforce and housing happen quickly, my main concern is the city getting land because the city is not a developer. And I wonder if you guys have thought through an option to donate that land to a group that is like a PHA, basically.
Yeah, so I would say that that's how I see this happening, is that the city's not a developer, and much like the redevelopment of other parcels of land, that the city would go into some long-term land lease with a developer whose primary job, or primary, job is
Mission,
to-
yeah.
mission is the word. Primary mission is to build permanently below market rate housing.
And how do you make that happen quickly? You know what
Well, I mean, I think part of it is that if you, in the way I view it, right? If you're looking at something where this potentially is a plot of land, like if we're going here, right? If we're looking at commerce versus, a potential future, if you're looking at a buildable plot of land that has no restrictions, that is now zoned, municipal or however that's going to work. To me, I think that I think it's easier to build something quicker when you have less potential community resistance and you're not taking something away from a community or from a neighborhood. And I think the way that I look at it, if we are looking at this as a pilot program, we're looking at spaces that are considered, quote unquote, considered potentially less desirable neighborhoods, or that have no residential neighborhood component currently. So you potentially have less pushback from it. But I am not a developer, so I look to the developers in the room and in the area to talk about the fact that, to me, it seems that we cannot rely on the private sector to build us out of a below market rate crisis, and I understand the math doesn't math. So what I feel like the only way that we can really make an impact as a city is to supply land, whether that is currently in use land, which is less desirable, or land that we potentially are obtaining that has no current use.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can ever do housing, as you know, you can't ever build anything quickly. But to me, if we could have, even over the next 10 years, 5 parcels that through an overlay that is similar to this in other areas, if we could have 5 parcels with 50 to 80 units on them over the next 10 years through an overlay like this, to me, that's a success.
And what are the benefits to the city being involved in that versus just the developer working with PHA and saying, PHA, we're going to give you the land, and based on our requirements here, you have to permanently make it affordable or whatever, taking the city out of it. And I'm asking this purely from
We'd gain an asset. I mean,
the city does, but is that a necessary piece of this puzzle?
I think they could do that. I mean, that's one option, is the developer builds workforce housing. And so how are they
But
do
does
that?
the 20, I
Yeah.
guess it's
Yeah,
the first.
Go through a conditional use permit.
The workforce housing one, doesn't that have to be within the 120
You're
units?
saying if they build it outside of the overlay?
Right. So they say I got this acre of land.
Let me cut
Yeah.
the city out of the conversation. So it's not the city doing a land lease with a
With PHA.
nonprofit developer. It's me doing it. I mean, that's a conversation that could be had. I think that the worry that I have is that while we use PHA as an example, we've seen that there are other, nonprofit or below, nonprofit developers who are not permanently below permanent. They cycle off after 20 years, 30
Yeah.
years. So that, to me, would be my only concern. But
The city could put a deed restriction.
on it. Yeah.
Right.
But we'd have to actually obtain ownership in order to do that.
I mean, the fastest way to get the units would be if the developer took the middle option of building it into the project
Right.
at 20% of the units.
Yeah, and I understand that sentiment. I just know that when you're building market rate housing, it's such a different thought process, an entire process, than when you're going after LIHTC credits or you're using different sources of funding to build more permanently workforce or affordable housing. So it is a specialty. So I one of the things that makes me so excited about the land transfer is like, yeah, let the specialists do that.
Right.
I just wonder if we can eliminate a step of the city getting involved.
Developers also partner all the time. So you could have a private developer specializing in market rate housing partner with another company to do the workforce housing component and bring that to qualify for the incentives. It's important to understand there's 3 different incentives here, and they're not required. So one thing I want to talk to Trevor and Peter about, because I hear everybody talking about how the parcel to be deeded to the city has to be inside the GNOD. I don't read that. So it has to be developable, it has to be suitable for workforce housing, and I don't know that it makes a difference if it's good land. What difference does it make?
Yeah.
But if that's an important point, then maybe that's an edit we can consider later. But I think that your point earlier about getting to that, getting past the 24 unit building is not cost effective, really, for a lot of reasons. So just taking the first threshold will result in more housing for sure.
Right.
Now, whether they go to the next threshold to get workforce housing, that is a question. And with just one developer who we know will probably be taking advantage of this right away, I see it as giving a lot more new housing and hopefully more workforce housing. That's the way I look at it.
But if they choose that middle option, the second option down the row, maybe I should have looked into this more, but my expectation would be that's the 10% that's on there right now in the Gateway District for the extra story, right? You have to provide 10%. Is this 20%?
Yeah.
And is it 20% of like-kind units within the same building?
It'd be 20% of the units in the development, so.
So they don't need to be like-kind. Maybe we can just go to that section and just,
Yes, they
See
could
what
be
it
a
says.
separate building.
They can also be 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, I thought I read.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if that's what constitutes like kind, but.
but they could share the parking and the public realm benefits.
So it references the Gateway section on workforce housing.
it's like Peter's been to this page before.
I don't think you can provide like a workforce ghetto. I don't think
Right.
that's not allowed.
I lived in them, they were fun.
That's what we are trying to avoid.
Right. None of us want that.
So this spells out 20% of the units within the development, and then it breaks out with for sale or rental and the size of each,
Distributed.
and they shall be distributed throughout the building wherever dwelling units are located.
So they can't be, you can't create like
A
this.
separate standalone.
Right, so when you talk about partnering, that's harder to,
It's more difficult architecturally, but you can do it. You know?
this says you have to sprinkle them through the building.
Right.
I think
It's a design problem.
everything is doable, but are things practical? Because it's just not a practical option.
Well, if it's not feasible, then the developer would pick either the payment in lieu or the donation. It's not a swap, it's a donation. So, you know, that's math. Developers, you know that, do the math all the time.
Yep.
That's why the innovation of the land transfer, land donation, is something new. That's the innovation. That
What are we going to do when people just want to pay?
Well, so then that money will go into our.
Developer trust.
No, I know, but like it's still like the chicken and the egg situation because the city won't have any additional land potentially to do it.
Yeah, so I think that then goes to what we decide happens within the land,
The trust.
Trust.
land trust, the housing trust.
That could
And
be-
whether that money is used to subsidize purchasing some land.
Right.
Or, kind of, if we see a building come up and we want to say partner with so-and-so, but they can't fully fund it, well, then it becomes a joint venture. And, or if that is put into realm improvements or X, Y, and Z.
I just
that
wonder
funding.
if, and I mean, obviously,
Math.
there are people much smarter than me who know this stuff, but I feel like there's an opportunity for us to really look at that second option and trying to make it be the more desirable. I think that's kind of the goal here, is to get
Doesn't say that.
workforce housing or below market rate housing sprinkled throughout
Yeah.
the city. Because otherwise, we're still going to end up with the example that you just shared, where it's like, it's siloed and it's, everybody's all together, and we know that's the workforce housing,
Yeah.
complex or whatever, but
Which I would add is not a bad thing.
no, it's not, but I think it's nice. I mean, there's been a lot of research to show that, socioeconomic diversity is really important. And I mean, I'm excited about the idea of this because it's a great way for us, it's a blank page in a way,
Yeah.
for us to create brand new neighborhoods and the future of what we want those neighborhoods to look like in the city,
Yeah.
in partnership with the right folks. But
I agree with you that there's the balance of the scale of okay, if they're going to give a parcel that is next to a development, we're going to now know that. But also in the same breath, I'm like, well, those people will have access to everything else that everyone, if it's sidelined parcel versus a parcel, say, in a different area.
sure, oh yeah, absolutely.
And within that workforce housing, there can still be diversity of income levels, of job types. I mean, it's not just going to all be bartenders. It's going to be, hopefully we can have opportunities for families to be in there
Sure.
as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's just about creating affordability. I mean, we're all part of the workforce. It's not the workforce we're necessarily focusing on here, but nevertheless, we can still create community with these things.
Well, I think that comes up with the conversation too, where we talk about, what's the target demographic for below market rate that can be up to 120% of AMI in this area if it's for ownership and X, Y, and Z. So it's, but I agree with you that it's, I personally, and I'm not a builder, and I would look to developers and the more planning people. We're just seeing that people are not using the incentives to build the units
Right.
within the development. So, and that was when we were sitting down working through this, I tossed out the land. Well, can't they just give us land and we'll build it? And there was some pushback. There was no,
We will build it.
no, not we. Clarify for the record,
Not we,
we
yeah.
is not the city of Portsmouth. We being, for finding a partner who specializes in developing this. Again, looking back to what hasn't been working and what is an option that we have not ever tried, and this was the one that was we've never tried this. We've never tried saying, hey, you want an extra story? We want some buildable land. And I do think there is a feel-good moment in there too.
Sure.
Of saying I think there is sometimes this notion, not necessarily just here, but overall in the community, that every developer is a bad developer, and everyone's trying to pat their own pockets, and let's be real, none of us get up and go to work for free, and so well, how can we do something that we can all walk away and feel a little bit better about? I feel like I can defend, whether people like it or not, I can defend supporting an 8-story building in an area that nobody currently lives in. If I can say, hey, those 3 other stories got me 120 permanently below market rate units here, I can feel good walking away, from that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, what would be enticing to individuals or developers or companies to choose that option, and are we understanding, what that is? That's all.
Well, maybe Jen, you could give the private sector perspective. What I hear you saying is the sweet spot for the private developer is 5 stories, 120 units, the skin around it, and the elevators and all. That's all efficient. That all works. But we want incentives that are, we've got a menu of 3 incentives here to get to that. Are they easy? Are they manageable? It seems to me cutting off an acre and a half of land and donating that is hitting the easy button. But,
I would agree.
yeah.
And I think people would typically pick, it depends on the payment, but you'd write a check before you build the units. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go to Eric.
The discussion is interesting, but in particular, have the metrics of any incentives, are they in black and white, or is it at a, are they to be measured on each proposal by a developer? I'll do this if you give me that. Is it in black and white to the amount of land that's supposed to be donated for that 5th story or 6th story or anything, or is it just, it's there in concept?
It seemed really clear to me. For every 20 acres you want to develop, you need to provide an acre of land to the city for that last option.
With 20% of that, if you want to put an additional floor on. Right?
That would get you to the 6 stories or 80 feet, and you'd be able to build 120 units a building. That's the ticket Trevor was talking about. And then even the public realm improvements, I think those are pretty clearly defined. Like you need a sidewalk that's at least as long as, or a walking path that's at least as long as your property has frontage. I'm sure we could,
That's all
Peter could probably
currently
pull
in
that
the
up.
existing gateway district, as well as the percentage of workforce housing. The only thing that's not spelled out is the payment in lieu of. The way that is structured is that would be with the fee committee and probably reevaluated annually, depending on.
Yeah, that's a missing component right now. We don't know what the fee is. Kind of an important.
So with these things in black and white, where they're fairly well defined and ultimately going in front of the planning board, they don't have any leeway to make any shifts or changes per any proposal by a developer, right?
The way this would work, the developer could go up to, but wouldn't have to go all the way, but developer would go all the way up to whatever is permitted.
Because the developers, most generally, are pretty clever people who are going to look at this and read between the lines, read every aspect that's going to be to their advantage. And
Yes.
those are the controversies that are, not well understood at the moment, but, just as long as there's some rigid, definitions that you don't have any leeway to, I'm not saying you don't have the leeway, but, the sensitivity of a developer coming in and kind of, well, we'll do this, but, at a minimum level to satisfy that for the incentives. I think there's been other projects that, some of the measurable incentives might not be quite up to everybody's standards, but that's just an opinion.
Having those guidelines be very clear is something that developers look forward to. Nobody wants to spend money on a potential project not knowing, like, if I do X, Y, and Z, I can get this. Like, you got to spell it out really clear, and I think this does a good job of it, other than the payment, which sounds like has to go through a different
But
committee.
to your point, there's not a lot of subjectivity here, and that was on purpose. As Jen just said, it's very clear. Developer coming in will know, if you do this, you get that. So you can spend the money doing the design, you can spend the money coming to the planning board, and you're not going to feel like you're getting sandbagged.
How did they come up with the 20-acre number, to like 20 acre for an acre? That's a lot for Portsmouth, when the rest of us are like really happy to have like, a 4,000 square foot lot. Like, that's a lot, So I'm just curious, like, where that kind of figure came in. And I recognize, like, this is a totally different part of our city currently. I'm curious.
Well, keep in mind that this doesn't mean it's just one lot that's 20 acres. You can have development sites which are adjacent lots or in the same area, all owned by the same entity in the end, ultimate entity. So they can sort of, I don't want to say piggyback, what's the right word to use? They take multiple lots that, for instance, we did this downtown where the Hearth Garden is. That's also part of where Toscana is. Like, there was like 3 separate lots, but we considered it as a planning board as one development site. So that way they could share incentives as far as community space and everything that went between all the buildings.
And how much acreage was that? You give a good example.
I don't remember, do you?
If you
Those
could,
are a lot
if
of
you
things
could
to
throw an
remember.
example of what a 20-acre
Well, I
development.
mean,
parcel
downtown,
is.
isn't it like, once you're at larger than an acre, then all of a sudden, like, the game changes for you.
Right.
That was
Right.
part of the.
Right, but
And
that's
like, I recognize
downtown.
it's not going to be an acre, but, I don't know, 20 seems like a lot.
I have the same.
Okay, think about this. Service Credit Union is looking at doing a development on the lot behind theirs. That's 26 acres. That lot that we changed the
At least
zoning
10,
on
15.
is 26 acres. So for that alone, you know, we would get more than an acre if that was the kind of deal. So
How big
there
is
are those lots out
Christmas
there.
tree shop?
Like 10 to 15.
That's well over 20.
Christmas tree shop is well over 20.
I think it's 28, 26.
Should we look at
23?
GIS? We could just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up.
So there are, outside the core, there are those larger lots or multiple lots put together that make quite a bit.
I am curious to drill in a little on this more. Was 20 acres chosen specifically, or was it just a number that? I mean,
Here's how
obviously
it came about. Some of the metrics that are in this came about as a result of conversations that these counselors had and the gentleman at the end of the table had as a part of getting this into a draft form that then came to the planning board for consideration. I looked at that and said, rather than just have a stipulation for a 1-acre conveyance, what if there's a big enough project, shouldn't there be the opportunity for more conveyances? And if it's a bigger project, there ought to be more conveyances. So that's where it came from, me. It's for discussion.
I like having a number. I just wonder, can we get it smaller so that anybody who is developing larger plots of land is going to potentially take us up on this conveyance?
Like
Well,
10 acres.
it's like a ladder, so you basically have to provide the 1 acre, whatever you're doing. But if you have a big enough project, then it's a formula related to that, so you
Got it.
have to provide more.
So if you chose the land conveyance and you were only developing on a 4-acre plot, it would still be 1 acre that you had to.
Right.
Correct.
but would you get credit, or was it the acre and a half that you could carry forward the half-acre credit to the next project? I saw that in there.
Yeah. So the concept there is, you know, say a developer may have several developments in the pipeline long term, but they're only coming forward with one right now. They could do the land conveyance for all of their projects kind of at once. They could convey, say, 5 acres of land, and then use the 1 acre for the one project they're doing now, and
Get a voucher for the rest.
bank the other 4, so they wouldn't have to keep coming back to city council, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. They could just do it kind of all at once.
So what you're saying is, if I have 20 acres, but I'm starting just developing 25% of it, I want to get my 5th or 6th story, I give up the 1 acre to the city, and then I can hit the 6 stories on the rest of the land whenever I want to develop on it. Because I paid forward.
Well, you'd have to do more than just that 1 acre, and you'd have to essentially have correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who's smarter than me. I feel like I'm just repeating what I've heard. When you have a master, you're going to have a master site plan.
Well, because you said they were banking it.
Yep.
So to me, that means I kind of paid it, and now I'm good to do, I've hit the payment that I have to do, and now I'm good to hit the 120 units throughout this full 20-acre project.
Wouldn't that be the case up to 20 acres?
Yeah, the 1 acre gets you up to 20 acres
Up
of
to
development.
20.
So you give the
Yeah.
1 acre, you can do your 4 acres, you can do another 4 acres, you can do another 4 acres.
Right,
and
okay.
do The final 4 acres.
That's how I
So-
interpreted it, so thank you.
How big is the plot for Ruth Griffin?
I'm sorry.
How big is the plot for Ruth Griffin? Like, what could we expect to achieve in terms of units on 1 acre?
On 1 acre.
That's, I think,
A lot. This allows big buildings. I don't know if you read that, but this is big buildings, much bigger than anything else. There's no density, there's no acreage density requirement. So you're looking at the
it's hard
potential
Hard to say based on
hundreds of
design
units.
style.
Many hundreds of units.
But at least 80. I mean, there's language for that.
We have to have a minimum of being able to build at least 80 units on whatever is donated.
On that acre of land, we have to be able to, it has to be able to hold a minimum of 80 units.
So did you see that Ruth Griffin is with the PHA building next door
Yeah.
is 1.44. So just the new building, maybe half of that.
So the buildings can get up to 400 feet in length, and we get the height, but pretty high. So pretty big buildings. You can get a lot of units in those buildings.
I'm the type of person who would struggle to get this chair out that door, so like, I need to wrap my head around.
I know, that's why I was asking about like how big the acreage was at a Christmas tree shop, so that we could have like a comparable,
So
I feel like we've all seen that.
that's 16
16.
acres.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
not 20.
they have multiple parcels. So
Right, they have that
they have this
parcel plus that.
parcel, that's 6, and then I think this one,
So that's what, 22 right there.
something like that. And then
Plus-
maybe this is 5 acres.
27?
Oh, that, I was thinking of.
Yep, they have that and the one on the other side of the hotel as well, yeah.
And
So,
how much is the main one?
16.
Yeah, and so,
so when you add the other two, they have, because I remember thinking they had about over 20 acres
Yeah, they
there.
could do over 500.
Units by
by
right.
right, they could.
And they're only doing under 400.
And keep in mind, this is developable land, not.
Yes.
Right.
There's a lot of wetland out
Right.
here.
And so I guess to that point, is the 20, if I have my 20 acre bank, does it have to be 20 acres of developable land, or is it, okay?
It doesn't have to be, it gets to be, because you
Gets
can't
to
put
be.
buildings unless it's developable. So you wouldn't opt for this unless you could do it.
Unless you could do it.
Yes.
Just earlier, we were talking about the reasons why leaving the city in the middle, and the two positives that I see from that is, one, once the city owns it, it becomes municipally zoned, and it stays municipally zoned. So it gives a little bit more flexibility to what could get built there on top of the fact that it would be part of these developments. And two, it also maintains that the city will ensure what's there for good, right? We get to make sure that it will be developed under, at whatever, is set forward. So I think that there's some real positives there to it being municipally zoned and for the city maintaining control. And I think when we look at the RFQ that went out and the 8 responses that we originally got back, I think there's a lot more interest in that being able to be done and repeated. So I see that as a positive. If we're getting an acre here or an acre there, we know that there are those people out there that we could go through that process and get those things built. So.
And I think it's important, at least from my perspective, when I look at this, again, I look at it as a pilot, and I look at places like Water Country and on Heritage and some of those spaces that do have large parcels that potentially could be redeveloped, that there's light manufacturing, you know what I mean? We're not.
Right. Industrial zones, you could overlay this to those as
Yeah.
well as office.
So when I look at some of those bigger parcels that we could be building housing on, to me, this.
So if this works, we could use it in other areas of our city.
Sure, absolutely.
That's why this is a great pilot to figure out if it works or not.
How big is the area that we're trying to do the rezoning on?
Has anyone added that up?
I want to know.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I could roughly measure.
It's like 15 lots, I know that, because I do remember counting those, but I don't think I counted what the acreage was.
Oh,
What?
those are the fuel tanks, is that?
They're
No,
gone.
they're not
They're
there.
gone.
They're gone. I know they show up in this. but
I
they're not.
understand the fuel tanks are gone, but.
The Homewood's included in the
It is in the
GNOD.
zone?
Yes.
I think you cut out a piece, Peter.
Yeah, the Homewood's included in it.
Yeah,
It is.
A little postage stamp there.
Yeah.
that hotel, yeah.
Yeah, it goes over the hotel and.
Yeah, those
The tiny corners.
tanks are cleaned, not there.
While he's doing that, and back to Jen's earlier question about the city, I'm not comfortable with the city taking ownership generally, but a zoning ordinance is basically a contract between landowners and the city, and by allowing and providing the opportunity for the city to acquire this land as opposed to trying to bring a third party into a zoning ordinance, I see that being a complicated mess, and maybe some legal issues there too.
Yeah, I can see that, and I guess I would hope that the city would find a way to make the process that we're going through with Sherburne just faster.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
historically it has been faster. I think that's an important thing to remember is that historically, when the city's transferred properties for redevelopment to PHA, it's been a faster process. This, I think, was a different process because it was a much bigger part, it's one of the biggest parcels of land and not just, say, a building. And so, again, I think that we've learned a lot about, how we need to go forward if the redevelopment of municipal property that's not just a building comes forward. I think when you look at like Cottage and Lafayette School, those were just buildings. This was building in land. And I think that made it a more difficult initial process because the city hadn't taken a 5-acre parcel and redeveloped it before.
Yeah, and Griffin Place was 7 years.
Yeah.
The
Were less
Lafayette
lawsuits?
School went through a couple of years. It was initially,
Griffin was held up by litigation, though.
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
so.
You sure this is wood?
I have
Particle board is somewhat wood.
a question for Peter Stith and staff. If an applicant came, as Jen's envisioning, and said, we can give you the land, or we can just partner with the PHA, would that be doable under a conditional use permit? Would that violate the terms of the ordinance?
The ordinance as written does not contemplate such a scenario.
Can we add that into the ordinance? I mean, if we're hearing that that's something that would,
I don't think you want to.
you would,
I think that's
Why?
the concern with legal staff is adding the
third party.
Here's the way that could work, is a developer,
Could already
two or
do the
more
work.
developers could come with an application that included 2 different parcels.
Yes.
That could happen very easily. Or one developer could come and say, we've subdivided this piece, it's going to be this, and Jen's bringing that in next week, so you'll see it then. Or, there's a lot of ways to do it as opposed to writing it into the zoning. Writing that into the zoning would be,
nightmarish.
So essentially like pre-partnership. So if you're developing this land and you have this plot, you go and do all the work and you now have PHA or someone who's submitted an application on that plot and then that goes through planning and all that.
It's also a huge benefit that the city can get the workforce housing parcel developed on its own timetable. So you separate the developer's timetable from the workforce housing timetable, and the city can hold that as to take the time needed to go through an RFQ process and get the best bidder. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that.
So this is like a technical kind of question, but so if we're going to do a land transfer, it has to be developable land. Does it have to be like in the right condition though? Like I'm just imagining like if there's tons of trees on it, and sure it's probably fine. Like that's really expensive to go in there and clear stuff. I don't know if that's anything we're thinking about. If the vision is for us to be like, yes, please, let's build on it.
So I don't know if we put any type of like environment.
Yeah,
Did put
there's an
environmental,
environment.
but that
You're
was
required
more
to do a
for
phase
liability.
1.
Yeah, that's more we want to make sure it's not like a hazardous waste dumped on it.
So the way that it's kind of structured here is the developer, when they're offering the land, they have to provide all the kind of nuts and bolts of whatever parcel they're looking to convey to the city, which is something they would have to do anyway, right, if they're seeking to develop land. Then all of that information is submitted to the city council, who then has the benefit of relying on staff or other experts if they so choose to hire them, and they have the discretion. I mean, it's land. Land is unique, to your point.
Right.
Not every piece of land is the same, and it's discretionary on the city council of whether or not that particular city council wants to accept that particular parcel of land.
Okay.
And it's going to be just a case-by-case basis, if you will.
Okay.
With all the pitfalls with land, we felt like that was important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To make
no,
sure-
absolutely.
And to put the cost burden on the developer versus on the city. We don't want someone to just hand us over a piece of land and we're like, well,
We can't develop
Right,
it.
it's a
We can't
huge
do
slab
anything
of
with it.
granite
yeah,
or something.
exactly. And so having them also do that due diligence, to me, allows the developer to run the numbers more too. Does it make sense to spend all this money doing all of this due diligence on the land and X, Y, and Z and getting it, prepped, or do I just want to build the units, or do I want to just write a check?
Cool.
and takes that off of the city staff, the monetary effect of what that means.
So the area is approximately 95 acres.
Okay.
It's almost 100. That's pretty good.
So the legislative process, if it works, would be a recommendation from this committee.
Yes.
Then the planning board make a recommendation to council for first reading. Planning board will have a public hearing at our October meeting. Council will have,
Technically, we're having first readings next Monday, September 23rd. And that was because of notice. In order for us to have a
Yeah, well-
public hearing, we can't have it till our second October meeting. If we had waited till the first October meeting, we wouldn't have made notice.
so
for
we'll
the
make a
second.
recommendation for a reading that's already been noticed.
I already put it under my name to give the planning board from tonight's update on Monday, so they'll have that. And they'll know at least what's been thinking and that we've scheduled the public
And
hearing.
there's an under our name will be an update from this committee. Yeah. So if nobody, and we can have tons of questions because this is going to go through the legislative process. So
It's going to have lots of hearing.
So I would look for a motion to recommend the city council adopt the proposed Gateway Neighborhood Overlay District as presented. And that would be a motion from this committee as we've seen it. Again, it is still living, breathing, working through its legislative process. The planning board, I'm sure, is going to dissect it more than we did because they know some of these terms that I don't know.
I would love to make that motion, but I have a question for Rick first.
Yes.
When you read this, what's going through your head?
You edited it.
Depends on which part.
What are the biggest things that excite you and things that make you nervous about this type of zone?
At this point, I'm not that nervous about it. When I first saw it, there's a lot of work done before I ever saw it. And I was just basically trying to think of it in putting my developer hat on. I'm working for a developer. How am I going to work with this thing? Where can I find holes in it? Where can I, mess with it, basically? So I tried to close those holes up and work with Trevor and Peter to, get that together. And then Beth provided a final read, which helped.
It's just some typos.
But the overall structure, in terms of like the metrics, back to Eric's question earlier, those basically came to us as a part of the negotiations that have been ongoing. So the overall potential development size was basically a given, and so that's baked in. But again, to try to put some better, I hope better parameters around to make sure that it can happen the way we're talking about it happening. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I'm just curious if you had anything we hadn't discussed that you were thinking
if I
about.
thought there was a big hole, I would have mentioned it to these guys before tonight. And they would have said something to me if they'd seen it, if they'd seen something else. So that's the kind of discussion we've been having.
I guess the one thing that we have discussed tonight that I think we can discuss at planning board is not so much the fee, is actually whether or not the piece of land we're given is part of the GNOD. I read it as such. We're having an argument, but we argue all the time as to whether or not it does or doesn't. So I think maybe just that one paragraph we could look at and see whether or not it's super
How
clear.
does this committee feel about that? Do you feel it's important that it be inside the GNOD, or that it just be developable land in the city?
There's so much leeway that the city council has.
To say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. To say like that's not a desirable parcel, find us another.
I mean, when I was answering or making the comment on your point before, Eric, that like it's really nice to have very clear guidelines of like, okay, I know if I do this, I'll get X. That is the one place that I look at. I'm like, well, they could say no.
But they get a bonus from that because they don't need a conditional use permit.
The other reason the
give and take,
developer might be inclined to want to find a piece of land not in the GNOD is the GNOD allows a lot more intense development than elsewhere in the city. So I'd be less inclined to give up an acre of this than I might another acre of developable land somewhere else in the city.
Yeah, I think you can see it both ways.
Yeah.
I see it as if it's viable land. Why wouldn't we take them up on it?
Wherever or inside the GNOD?
I would say wherever. I mean, if we have the ability to ultimately make the decision of whether we want to accept that or not,
Yep.
then I think it makes all the sense in the world to get whatever we can get. And if it's something that's appealing, having the restriction would be counterintuitive.
I would bring up, Dagan, that the city council would evaluate this acre of land, but if the developer finds an acre that he wants to offer up for conveyance, it may be an acre that is more expensive or more of a burden to develop because it's away from infrastructure, that it may be away from primary routes, as opposed to where the developer is actively building where the infrastructure we know is
Infrastructure is.
already going to be there.
But the city council has the ability to say no.
Exactly. That's my point.
We need an educated city council then.
Therein lies the
risk.
That's all up to you voters.
If I may, that could be something that over time, I mean, if this expands and grows,
changed.
I mean, times change, priorities change. City councils could adopt, a policy, given that it's a discretionary decision by the council, councils could develop a policy relating to what kind of land they would prefer. That again could be updated and revised. It could be more of a living document than this necessarily,
And the zoning
than the
ordinance.
zoning ordinance, right?
Yeah, to go under the city code.
The
Which makes
motion's
sense.
still out there.
Yeah, the motion,
Looking for a second.
Second.
Did we discuss whether we should
I didn't. I did not
Ben
officially.
did the first.
No, I didn't officially.
She said she would like to.
Are you now comfortable making?
I don't know. I'm still having fun talking about it.
Talk about it even after we make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion, but I.
10 minutes.
I know. I'm going to take my 10 minutes. No,
Is the motion based off expanding this outside the GNOT, or is
The motion is going to be just
As
is
written, right.
presented.
it's
To
gonna be
recommend it to city council.
guidelines of the GNOT? We're not going to expand it beyond its present state.
We have to sort out how it's worded, but the motion is exactly the way it was in your packet.
Motion to add, oh boy, let's see if I can do this. Motion to add the ability to accept land outside of the GNOT.
Well, right now, the way it's written, we
You-
can argue
you
both
could.
ways. So I think it's as written, you can.
Motion retracted.
The way he argues it.
Motion-
Well, yeah, but maybe it's maybe we make the motion with a recommendation to figure that out.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Well,
If that's
because
your
there's going to be more
recommendation-
conversations.
Yeah.
But I
And
think
I would say that would be to me, that's a recommendation that that I'm looking to the planning board tonight to
really
really.
talk about, and I think that's one of the conversations
Count
we
on me,
can
I'm
have
gonna
before.
bring it up.
Right. One of us is going to bring it up so that we can talk about it before we even
opened
have a
that
public
box
hearing.
for you.
Right. Yep. We'll open the
Hopefully
box
it's
and
not
we'll discuss
Pandora's.
it. Yep.
So the motion remains as Joanna Kelly just read it.
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have a?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, and then do we have a second?
Seconded.
Okay.
Can't seem to ever get anyone else to want to make motions.
It's love to be the motion.
Same problem in planning board. I have.
That's the motion morale. Okay, is there any more discussion on this? And then what we can make sure we do is that we will bring you back updates as it goes through the legislative process. And if there is any recommendations that this body wants to make, we can make them and kind of see how it goes. But we will keep you updated as it goes through.
I would also recommend that if you would like to speak at the public hearing at planning board, that you plan on coming on the third Thursday in October, which I believe you'll all already be here, right? Don't we have a meeting that night? 14th? 17th? So
And
you guys.
at what point in the process does the fee committee come in?
I think we're.
TBD.
Yeah, it's to be determined. I think the fee committee can take a look at that once it's actually in place. I know we have the RKG study that we've talked about, actually using the formula that they had to possibly try to figure out on a case-by-case basis. It might actually be something that the fee committee needs to have a special meeting when this is proposed.
In my opinion, you'd have to do that. There has to be a fee in place, even if you need to change it right away, because without it, there's a missing component. Trevor wants to say
I
something.
know. I know Trevor wants to say something. I can tell by the look on his face.
Okay, so I'm gonna call for the vote so that we can do public comment. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you, Tracy.
There's no no's.
Are we going to have any discussion on the RFP that just went out on
Not
Sherman?
on our agenda tonight.
What's that?
It's not on our agenda tonight.
Well, it's going to come and go, with a drop dead date of October 9th for submission.
correct.
It's going to be come and go, it's going to come and become, come and go before our next meeting, right?
Would you like to make a motion to suspend, so we only have 7 more minutes.
know.
But if you'd
I-
like to make a motion to suspend the rules and discuss it real quickly, we can.
Yes, I'd like to make it.
Okay. Second? I'll second. Oh, Megan, second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Go ahead, Eric.
No, it's just, I read the RFP. It looks like it was very thoroughly developed. The only comment that I would make, it's beyond a short fuse, with October 9th as final submission for any proposals of a project that, seems to have some sensitivity and magnitude to it. So with these, it would just make sense from my perspective that they just don't start from scratch as soon as they get the RFP and then come up with a whole design package in such a short time frame.
That's not really what we asked for.
Yeah, we're not asking for
them to
a
design it out. We're
Well,
asking
no,
to have
but-
the concepts.
Yeah, the concepts. But I mean, that's up to them on what they're going to submit because that's the most important part of what they're going to bring forward in any type of public process is some visual aspect of what they want or what their proposal is going to have, is going to be.
My hope, Eric, actually, is that there's less of a visual aspect, as in like, that there's actually less of a visual, like this is going to be brick and this is going to be slab board or this, and that there's more of a site plan understanding of what it looks like there could develop there and all of that. Because what I want to make sure as a community we don't get stuck on is what we got stuck on a couple years ago, which is someone brought a picture of a 10-story building that had no conceptual grounds of what else could be around it. And then we all hated it and, revolted from it. And then it, kind of fishtailed into.
Right. So maybe I'm confused to understand what they're going to submit, as of the night, whether it's any type of conceptual site,
So,
visual
Eric,
aspect of it.
The RFP requested to the 4 selected people, show us what your conceptual breakdown of what the unit would be comprised of. How many 3 bedrooms, how many 4s, how many 2s,
With or without the school,
with or without the school.
all that stuff.
And all we asked was you provide us a plan view, looking down at it, saying this is how it could be grouped and what the massings would be. The whole effort of the RFP is to find the developer so they can get started and then go through all the engagement process with the community, with the city, in saying we need to develop this conceptualization of what this could be into a real firm development so we can go ahead and get the tax credits.
So if you have 4 developers submitting some conceptual site visualization of what they propose, how is that blended with any community outreach in public process?
Because they'll be selected and then they need
Who
to.
will select them?
City council.
Well, eventually, in turn, the city council will select them. The
City council will
developer.
select the final
Developer that they're going
final
to team with.
developer out of the 4,
Yep.
based off of,
Based off their responses to the RFP and whether that is.
And a scoring.
And a
Rating
scoring.
scoring system.
And whether that feels satisfactory.
What they submit, and if they get selected, is not going to be the final design.
understandable.
That's what I want to.
There's going to be, I would suspect they would submit options of, well, basically with or without the school, and then
Right.
with the school, what it would look like for the amount of units that would support it. I'm just getting at, when does the public process come in?
Once a developer is selected.
And they're tasked with the public process.
I know the task with 3 public processes or 3 public events of some dimension, so that,
So we would assume, I would assume from the way that I read the RFP, and I do not answer RFPs, but that within their submittal will have how they plan to outline a community engagement process.
The
And that is
community
important.
engagement process, as you mentioned, will be 3 meetings with the community as direct outreach. There's also going to be the public process of going through with permitting and everything else, so they can get to a level of an approved design that they could submit for their tax credits.
Right, because they have to actually have planning board approval before they can actually submit for tax credits.
But the final picking the one out of the 4 is still a scoring process through the city.
Yes.
For them to pick that, whether, and that's whether one of the 4, has a conceptual design that's superior but scores low. I think, I'm just kind of curious about, the final selection.
We know
And, if it's based off a scoring process. I mean, the community might like a conceptual design from a developer that scores low in however the scoring process goes.
Can I just, I would not recommend any of you talk about how you're going to be scoring any of these or the scoring process. I think, Howard, you should speak to the.
The scoring process is outlined in the RFP.
Agreed. I'm just saying, I don't think
That's all
any
I
of you
was
should
gonna say.
comment on it.
I was like, I don't know.
Just from a lead.
Right.
If there's a good idea, it might also get picked up by the final selected developer. That happens all the time.
Okay.
All right, well, I just didn't think we should go through the course of this meeting without some discussion of it,
We would have been
There's still
disappointed in you
there's
if
still
you
somewhat
didn't.
of a mystery
Eric.
about, who the final one is going to be, but.
Yeah, I would say it's a mystery to everyone because the deadline isn't here yet. So given that, we have just a few moments for public comment. If anyone wants to come up, give your name. Yep. Or not you. Give your name.
Jim Smalley. I agree that this is an excellent plan.
Could you bring the mic up a little closer?
Jim Smalley. I agree this is an excellent plan. I'm concerned more about the calibration of it. You've decided that 1 acre for conveyance. What's the probability of success, and how many units would you get at that 1 acre? Versus, and I think, Dagan, you were referring to this earlier, what if it's a half an acre? Right? Would you more likely get more units, right? More units built. So when you're thinking about it, do think about, what burden are we placing on the developer? Because there's that cost involved in that transfer of land that they have to purchase. Jen, you talked about the heights, 5 stories being optimal, most efficient, but there are other steps to that, right above 7. I think it's 11 or 15, something like that. I often wonder about height restrictions and that limitation on, it could be natural. Let the developer say, hey, we could put in, if we put in 6 stories here, or 8 stories, or 10, whatever that makes for their incentive of profit. Efficiency may not equate to maximum profitability. You may end up with more units there, too. All right. But this overall is a great direction to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay. Second. All in favor?
Good job, Megan.
Thank you, guys.